Good afternoon. I am very sorry I cannot speak your beautiful language. And you have to hear me through some wonderful translators. I will try to go at a speed that helps them get the information to you, but I get excited sometimes and speak too quickly. So I apologize if you miss some of what I'm trying to say. I work for a not-for-profit organization that encourages the private sector to engage with culture. These are some of the businesses that we work with. These are some of the arts organizations. And these are some of the international organizations which we work closely with. The debate is, I think, universal. The debate about how does the private sector engage with culture. And this is a satellite photograph of California. And here is Bahia de California. And in the 16th century, a Spaniard named Father Ascension took a boat up the Bahia. And he got about halfway, and he decided that California was actually an island. And for 100 years, this was the map that was used to show California. 100 years later, after Father Ascension, another Spaniard called Father Kino walked from here to here without getting his feet wet. He was the first person to prove that California was not an island. And it still took about 50 years before the map makers started to redraw California as it is. In my country, and I think in your country, there is a fundamental change that is happening about the funding of culture. This is not a short-term blip. We will not go back to the world as it was. This is fundamental. The question is, what map do we use to find our way through this new country? And crucially, is that map accurate or not? And that's the question you have to ask for yourselves in your country, as arts organizations and governments and the private sector has to ask in our country. My thesis is that for too long we have worked with the wrong map. And that is what I'm going to try and explore today. This lovely man is Caius Cilnius Maecenas. Maecenas was very successful in the time of Augustus Caesar, and he made a lot of money, and he decided to spend his money by being nice to writers, to Virgil and to Homer. If you want immortality, be very nice to writers, because writers write the history of your time, and Maecenas went down as being the first patron of the arts. You have mécénat in your country. In France, they have a system called mécénat, which is halfway between sponsorship and donations, words I will explain later on. Our sister organization in Japan is Kyogi, Mécénat Kyogikai. If we move forward 1,400 years, we get to the Medicis. The Medicis. The Medicis were bankers. They made money by charging interest. Their problem is they were very strong Catholics, and the Catholic Church said, charging interest is a sin for which you will go to hell for eternity. And that's a bit of a problem if you're a banker. Fortunately, the Catholic Church was very clever, and they said, if you buy nice works of art for us, you won't go to hell. We can stop you going to hell. And from that, we got the Renaissance, because the Medicis didn't want to go to hell. This is the Bristol Old Vic, which is a wonderful 1700s theatre in a town called Bristol in England. The Bristol Old Vic was created by 50 business people in Bristol coming together and deciding they wanted a theatre in their town. And each of these 50 business people decided to give £50 to achieve that objective. And each of them received in return a silver token. And this token says, the proprietor of this ticket is entitled to the sight of every performance in this house. And the Bristol Old Vic is still around today, and they still give a free ticket to every performance to someone who has one of these tokens. This was business people recognizing that great theatre was not only something that they could enjoy themselves, but was a mark of a great city, that you had great theatre within it. Going forward again about another 150 years, and we have Henry Tate. Henry Tate had a big collection of British paintings. He wanted a house for them. He wanted to create a gallery in which he could put his paintings. And he got involved in a very long debate with our government about the creation of this gallery. And there were a lot of hurdles, a lot of barriers that the government placed. And I love this quote from the Daily Telegraph, which is basically saying that you should not subject a donor to all the problems of tax and legal structure. And I think if there's one important lesson from this, it's that whatever structures are created, never let them get in the way of the donor achieving what they want to achieve. And it wasn't until about 1950, after the Second World War, in my country, that we started to see public funding of culture. This was part of what we call the welfare state, when the government started paying for the schools and for the hospitals and for the theatres. And then we elected, So if this is the map of Britain and culture for the last 1,000 years, public funding was really only that bit at the end. Then we elected Meryl Streep, or Margaret Thatcher, to be our Prime Minister. And she was a stern capitalist, and she turned around to the arts, and she turned around to other parts of society, and said, you must raise more of your own money. And that's what started it in our country, is a politician saying, you have to go and do it. We were very lucky at that time that there was an economic boom in Britain, and it was easier to raise money. But the politician had to turn to the arts and say, you have to do this. Private sector support, of course, happened across this entire period. Private sector support of culture has a far longer tradition than public funding. But because of the focus given by Margaret Thatcher on it, the amount of private sector support started to seriously increase. In 1976, private sector support stood at £600,000. And by 2010, it now stands at 6 million. It takes time to affect change. Nothing happens overnight. But there has been a fundamental shift in my country. From a time when no one thought that private sector support of culture could work. No one thought that the sense of philanthropy will happen in my country as it happens in America. But it has changed. And you're a Spanish country, you're a Latin American country. I don't know if it will change in your country or not, but it has certainly changed in ours. And I suspect it can change in yours as well. One of the big changes was the introduction of the National Lottery in 1995. And it was decided that culture would be one of the recipients of National Lottery money. But here's the interesting thing. What they said is that the money can be spent on building buildings, but the lottery will only provide 75% of the money. If you wanted a lottery grant, you had to raise 25% of the money. The most obvious example of all of this is, of course, Tate Modern. It cost about £135 million, and so the Tate had to raise about £40 million. And they did. And this happened across the United Kingdom. This process of having to raise money in order to release public money was hugely successful. And I would argue, actually, that if a government is thinking about, do we give a better tax break, or do we create matching funding? From our experience, I'd say matching funding is always more successful than tax breaks. Give the arts the message they can take to the donors saying, if you give me £1, the government will give me £3. That unlocks the donor far more effectively than just giving the donor a greater tax relief. And this is the rise in private sector support of culture over the last 10 years. And the bit in green is individual giving, which is now bigger than corporate support of culture, in a country that never thought it had a tradition of philanthropy. And in part, this is to do with the lottery, and I mean, we are now at the point where something like Tate Modern has 50 fundraisers working in it. It's the American model. But half of all business support of culture in my country happens outside of London, happens to small-scale arts organizations. And the best example we found last year was a company that sells sewing machines in the Midlands. It's a tiny company, working with a group of craftspeople in Birmingham. And it was a wonderful relationship. Not a lot of money, but a really strong partnership. It can work for small organizations. And this is what we think the future may look like in terms of private sector support of culture. It depends on many factors. It depends upon the strength of the economy. It depends upon how proactive the arts are. And ultimately, it depends on the mindset of the arts organizations. Are they open to thinking laterally about how they can work with the private sector? Are they willing to be entrepreneurial? And the more they are, the more money will flow. Businesses tell us they give money to culture to achieve three things. Ultimately, they want to make more money. That's what all business want to do. And they want to make more money by working with culture to reach their customers, to reach their staff, to reach the community. And we call that sponsorship. It is a commercial relationship. Individuals may give money to help the arts exist. They may give money because they want the benefits from it. They want the free tickets. They may give money because they want to be seen to be a philanthropist. And some may even give money to make a profit in something called venture philanthropy. But in each of these, they want something in return. And I would argue that that is the basic rule of fundraising. Everyone wants something in return. And the secret of fundraising is to work out what it is they want and then to give it to them. Even if it's a donation, even if it's philanthropy, everyone wants something in return. Maecenas wanted to be known through history. The Medicis wanted to get out of jail. The businessmen in Bristol wanted great theatre. Everyone wants something in return. And the second rule about fundraising is it's about them. It's about what the money wants to achieve. It's not about you. It's not about you as an arts organization. It's not about what you do. It's about what they need. And I think too many arts organizations have forgotten this. They focus on themselves rather than focusing on what the money wants to achieve. I don't think anyone gives to culture to get a tax break. I don't think anyone who gives to culture really cares about the legal structure of the arts organization. Because I think everyone wants something in return. Tax and legal structure can change how they give. It can influence how much they give. But no one should ever confuse that with the real reason why they are giving in the first place. And I've seen in many countries arts organizations saying, if only we had this tax law, everything would change. And it won't, because that doesn't address the core interests of the money. It's an important element in shaping the marketplace, but it is not the ultimate answer. I'm going to talk a little bit about the tax and the structures in Britain, just so you get a sense of where they are. I appreciate some of these things are never likely to happen here, but I think there are some important learnings from the structures we have in our country that may be of use to you. Basically, there are three forms of structure for an arts organization. There is the loose association. A group of artists come together, there's no legal structure. There is those who are working for profit and those who are working not for profit. And these are official distinctions. For those with no legal structure, it's a loose association. There's no framework, there's no accounting framework, there's no legal framework in which they operate. For profit, they are owned by shareholders, the profits are distributed to the shareholders. It could be a partnership, a lot of legal companies are partnerships. And not for profit, it is known as their companies limited by guarantee. There are no shareholders. If you make a profit, you do not distribute them, you keep them in the organization. And they are often a registered charity. These are legal descriptions. These are there for accountants. And that's it. These do not describe the mindset of the people working in the arts organization. Most arts organizations are here, but their brains have to be here to survive. A business brain in a not-for-profit environment. Because they have to sell things, they have to get the money in order to survive. And that, if there's anything, that mind going from not-for-profit to profit is the fundamental shift that is happening in my country. And it's nothing new. Canaletto created pictures that he knew people would buy. This basic entrepreneurism has a long and honorable tradition in culture. And certainly in my country, the arts organizations are going to have to refine that mindset. Interestingly, there is a new model that's being created called the Community Interest Company, which is for social enterprises. Businesses that are commercial in approach, but have a wider social impact in mind. And to a certain extent, I think arts organizations are part of that model. Charities are, as I say, the model that most arts organizations sit in. And the really interesting bit about being a charity is the trustees. Businesses, commercial businesses, have a board of directors. Charities have a board of trustees. The trustees own the charity, but the trustees cannot be paid. This means that if you are a theatre company and you create your theatre company and you create your board of trustees, you cannot sit on the board of trustees. You have to give the ownership of your arts organization to these new people, which frightens a lot of artists. But actually, the strength from creating an independent board of trustees is so much more valuable than the potential loss of ownership. And one of the programs Arts&Bussiness runs very successfully is about placing business people on the boards of arts charities. An arts charity needs an accountant on its board. It needs someone who understands marketing on its board. It needs other artists on its board. It needs business advice so it can behave in a business-like way, even though it's a charity. There are obvious advantages of being a charity as well. There is reduced local taxes, and you can claim tax from the government if you have a donation. And there are also challenges. As with every regulation, there are pluses and there are minuses. But most cultural organizations exist in that. But they are not limited by it. This is Arts&Bussiness. Arts&Bussiness is a charity. We have a charity number. Being a charity limits what you can do. So Arts&Bussiness has also created a for-profit company called Arts&Bussiness Services. And the charity owns that company. So everything we can do for businesses, which is not charitable, we do in that, and that donates all its profits up to the charity. Last year, we merged with a bigger charity called Business in the Community. They wholly own Arts&Bussiness, and they also have a commercial arm. There was a few years ago an arts organization called Adventures in Motion Pictures that created an astonishing piece of contemporary dance by Matthew Bourne. They reimagined Swan Lake, with all the swans played by male dancers, not as women, but as male dancers. He recreated, and this was hugely successful as a piece of contemporary dance, and it traveled around the world. And I was talking to someone who ran Adventures in Motion Pictures, and they showed me the legal structure for this project. And it's hugely complex. Each production around the world was part of its own company. Some of them also had charitable arms to do the education work. Some were entirely commercial. So an arts organization doesn't have to be legally just a not-for-profit or just commercial. You can blend the two. You can create whatever structure works for you. So most theatres in my country, they are not-for-profit to put on the theatre, but they also have a cafe in their venue, and they run that at lunchtime, and that is not charitable activity, so that is run by a commercial company, wholly owned by the theatre. All the profits from the cafe are donated to the theatre. Trying to explain tax in English to English arts organizations is very difficult. Trying to explain tax through translators to a Spanish audience is almost impossible. But I like to try the impossible. So, if you are a charity, and if someone gives you money, there are tax breaks available. The problem is that a donation is legally money given for nothing expected in return. But as I have already said, everyone expects something in return. So how do you marry these two things up? And what our government have done, and you see this in other European governments as well, is they said, okay, you can give some benefits to a donor, but they are limited. They are limited by the financial value of the benefits. Interestingly, this used to be £500, and there was such an outcry from arts organizations that that wasn't, if someone was going to give you £2 million, you wanted to be able to give them a lot of free tickets. And so the government increased that in order to ensure that the very serious donations could generate significant benefits in return. There's a lot of detail in these laws to underpin this, and I can explain that later if you want to know. But the important thing is, if someone gives a donation to an arts charity, yes, they can have a free ticket. Yes, they can be acknowledged. That sense of giving some form of benefit is written into the law. And so it is, as I say, in different countries across Europe. There are 4 ways in which people can give tax efficiently. One is through their payroll. This is a model that is very popular in America. They have tried to introduce it in our country. It never works. It just goes to show that sometimes models that work in one country do not work in another. And the government has spent a lot of money trying to get this to work. And it just doesn't fit within the psyche of the British people. If you're going to give money, I give directly. I won't give via my employer. One that is potentially very tax efficient is the gift of shares. If an individual wants to give shares to an arts organization, the arts organization receives the shares, they can go and sell them, or that they can create an endowment that will see that arts organization funded in perpetuity. It's, again, a very American model. They're trying to introduce it in our country, but it's not easy. Very recently, they have introduced a measure to encourage the gift of works of art. Curiously, European legislation has made this quite complex, but there is a recognition that art collections have benefited enormously in the United States from this, and they wanted to introduce it in our country. There's a very interesting website called guidestar.com. Guidestar.com lists the accounts of all not-for-profit organizations in America. And if you look up Tate, they have an arm that raises money in America. And actually, most of the assets of the American Friends of Tate are works of art. Americans giving works of art to Tate, but they're held by the American arm because the Americans can then get the tax breaks available in America. But if you want to know how people fundraise around the world, in America you look up guidestar.com, and in Britain you look up the Charity Commission. They publish charity accounts in the United Kingdom. But the most popular way in which people can give tax efficiently is something called gift aid, and this covers cash donations. It's quite complex. I won't go through the details. If you were going to draw a map of how it works, this would be the sort of map, which I'm not going to explain. Because actually I think the fundamental part of that is this, which is the sales message that arts organizations can use to encourage someone to give. If I'm a UK arts organisation and you give me £60, because of gift aid, that is worth £75 to me. And if you're a particular type of taxpayer, that'll only cost you £45. Now, that's the sort of sales message that anyone will buy into. That's like saying this bottle of water costs £1.99 as opposed to €2. The important thing is that this underlines that the tax measure in and of itself is not going to change anything, really. What makes the difference is how the arts sector talk about it. And that's where the tax breaks go. We've had some of these tax breaks for years, but most people in my country think there is no tax relief for giving. And this goes to show, I think, how difficult it is to get tax relief entrenched in people's thinking, which is why I think matched funding is always more successful than tax breaks. Tax breaks accountants love. They get very excited by tax breaks. Match funding is an easier message to say to a donor. I'm just going to finish with what I think is the fundamental change that is happening. In my country, and I think in your country, the traditional model is that the biggest conversation is between the arts and public funders. That's where all the money talk happens. And yes, there is the general public, and yes, the public may buy tickets, but that's not important. The key conversation is between the arts and the public funder. I think that has, it's been very useful, and I very much support public funding and the continuation of public funding. The danger, the problem it has caused in my country is it means that the arts have not focused on the people. They have focused on the government. And that is not going to be the conversation in the future. Because I think the conversation in the future is that the biggest conversation is going to be between the arts and the people. The people as ticket buyers, the people as donors. If you get that right, the people will then talk to the government and encourage the government to keep doing public funding. And the great problem in my country is because the conversation between the arts and the people hasn't been strong, there is no voice going from the people back to the government to encourage them to keep funding arts. When the cuts happened 2 years ago in my country, the arts wanted to come up with an online petition to encourage people to tell the government to stop the cuts. They couldn't come up with one online petition. They had to come up with 3 because they couldn't work together. And the most successful got about 180,000 signatures. At the same time, there was an online petition to stop the government cutting money going to forests. That got 500,000 signatures in 6 weeks. Because the arts would not work together to create a single loud voice, they couldn't change the government thinking. It is incredibly important going forward that the arts work together across all art forms, across all types of organizations. But most importantly, there has to be stronger communication between the arts and the public. And that is, I think, fundamental to the future of the arts, both as I say, ticket buyers, as donors, as supporters. And that's the model that always used to exist. And I think that is the model that will exist in the future. Finally, I want to talk about Shunt. Shunt is as it says there, is a collective of artists creating and curating live performances in unusual locations in London. It's an artist collective. It is a registered charity. It is a company limited by guarantee. There's a railway station in London called London Bridge. It's a Victorian railway station. It's built on arches. And you can't really see, but here is an entrance to one of the arches. What this artist collective did is they persuaded the rail company to allow them to take over this arch. And every Wednesday, different artists would come in to create live performances, to rehearse them, and then the public were let in on Thursday and Friday and Saturday to see these artists. And each week it would be different. New happenings, new events, new performances. And it became hugely successful. There was a line every Thursday, Friday, and Saturday down that corridor of people wanting to get in. It was an artist collective. It was a co-op. And these people had created something in a new environment that was exciting, that was fun, and that was successful. And this is the income and the expenditure. And as you can see, for 3 years, their income exceeded £2 million. Why? Because they created a really exciting arts event and they ran a very big bar. The most successful arts organization in my country was making money out of selling alcohol. But they could only attract the people to buy the alcohol because it was exciting. It was sexy. And they were thinking differently about how they went about their art. The reason why it suddenly dropped off was because they lost the underground arch, because the railway station is being redeveloped. And they're now trying to find a new way of creating the art. This is a charity doing art and being very, very successful at it because they created something amazing and sold something that people wanted, both in terms of access to the art and in terms of the alcohol. And there is nothing in this that is against them being a not-for-profit arts organization. This is an entirely sensible approach in my country to how to go about presenting art. That's how you can get hold of me. I hope that what I've said has been of some use. As ever, you have to translate what I am saying into your country. I can take some answers now, or we can, myself and Tony and Chris, we're going to have a round table conversation at the end. But are there any questions immediately that anyone would like to ask? No? Then let's not wait for you, and let's move on. Thank you very much for listening.